This was about 6 years ago now, in early 2014. I'm a merchant marine, and at the time was working on an American-flagged car carrier in the engineering department as an oiler. My whole life growing up, I've had some rather strange things happen. Seen some things, felt some things, etc. But this is the first time I've had it happen on a ship I was working on. I was on the midnight to noon watch with the third engineer. When I was in the middle of my readings one evening, I happened to notice an orange blur in my peripheral vision on the deck below, which was the lowest deck in the ER. I turned my head and caught just a glimpse of an orange coveralls walking down the shaft. This wasn't the engineer or anyone else in engineering, as we didn't wear coveralls. Our work outfit consisted of cargo/mechanic pants and whatever shirt you owned. The deck guys, however, did wear orange. So I finished up my readings and walked down to the lower level to find him, the guy. I thought maybe it could have been the AB on night watch, but they don't make rounds in engineering spaces, but whatever. So I go down there and no one's there. Whatever, probably just tired, I thought, and finished my rounds. After finishing up, I turned in the sheet to the third in the control room, then stepped back out to go start on a project, when I saw the door to the tool room/machine shop flap closed. Again, I thought probably a decky down here to steal a tool or something. So of course I go to the shop, and as I entered the shop, the door to the storage room was just closing. I continue to follow, but there's no one in the storage room, and the only other way out would be through steering and up onto the main cargo deck. I continued into steering, gave a quick glance around. Again, I found nothing. On my way back out, I glanced into the hydraulics room when I finally saw him. He was facing away from me looking at a panel, and I almost just walked past. I caught myself mid-step and shouted over the sound of the steering pumps to get his attention. The man jumped and was turning around when the ship lost power. Losing power was nothing new. The ship has had a faulty shaft generator for a while. It was pretty standard. I didn't think anything of it until I got my flashlight out of my pocket, and the man was gone, like he was never there. I looked around, but nothing. I was starting to get a little nervous and jumpy at that point, but right before panic could set in, the diesel generators kicked in and lights were restored. I returned to the control room to ask the third if any decky had left the engine room through there, and he said no. Cut to a few days later, I was talking to the boatswain's mate in the deck locker when I noticed a picture hanging almost as if it were a memorial, and I asked him about it. The bosun said it had been there for a while. The ship used to be Swedish flagged, and they had a death aboard back then before it became US flagged. I sort of went quiet, then told him what I saw a few days ago, and he just goes, "Oh yeah, we catch glimpses of him roaming the cargo deck sometimes too." I didn't have anything else happen that trip, and we even got the shaft generator fixed in the next port. But still, it was sort of wild having that happen in the last place I'd ever expect. This is an experience I keep having that I wanted to share and possibly get advice on. A few weeks ago, my partner and I moved into a new luxury apartment with our 2 cats. We live in a major city near the beach. The apartment building was recently renovated, but has had previous tenants, and the land has also been in use for hundreds of years for various purposes. We are on the 6th floor. The only thing I found in the apartment that belonged to the prior tenants were folic acid supplements in the cabinet. Since the very first night we lived here, I've been having a strange experience with an entity. I've had some odd stuff happen before, but nothing quite like this. The first night I was still awake at about 2 in the morning and got up to use the bathroom. Clear as day, I heard a deep male voice say, "There you are." At first, I thought our home was being invaded. That's how human-like and clear the voice was. But then I saw a shadowy entity in the hallway. It was very tall, vaguely humanoid and dark, sort of like shadow but staticky almost, pixelated. It seemed to be walking on the ground. I retreated back to the bedroom and got in bed. I saw the entity briefly enter the bedroom without opening the door. It just went through the wall, and then go back to the hallway. I thought I might have had a waking dream or something. I told my partner about it the next morning, but we both shrugged it off. What's weird is, we were working from home the next day and I saw it again, standing in the hallway, still appearing shadowy, but this time in broad daylight. One of my cats, who was next to me, sat up and looked directly at it, which was what made me turn around to see it. Another cat walked around it in the same way it would walk around a human person. Around 2 to 3 a.m. every night, the entity walks the same pathway down the hallway, into the bedroom, then back through the hallway. During the day, it just sits in the hallway for 15 minutes or so before disappearing again. It doesn't appear every day, but it does appear every night. Sometimes it speaks. It once asked, "Where are you going?" when I turned around to go back to bed. It will otherwise not interact with me. It has never approached me or left the hallway/bedroom entry. My partner can't see it. The cats continue to interact with it, look at it, meow at it, etc. I performed a cleanse with sage and then with holy water my parents gave me, and I've had no luck. It's not a scary entity per se, but I do find it very unsettling and I've been struggling to sleep or relax. I started doing more research on what I can do about it and found this Reddit. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts. So, a little backstory. My boyfriend and I had just started dating at the time of the encounter. I have never stayed over at his house up until this night. The house itself is a 200-plus-year-old farmhouse that only him and his father lived in. The upstairs has 2 rooms that mirror each other with one sitting directly above my boyfriend's bedroom. Fast forward to the night I stayed over. It was early December and he lived about 45 minutes from where I was living at the time. I had the flu and he insisted I stay the night so he could take care of me. Because night falls faster in winter and they were calling for a storm on top of me being sick, I decided not to try and drive home. It was around 11 p.m. when we went to sleep after watching movies and taking it easy. Now, my boyfriend's bed has one side that is pushed up against the wall, and normally I feel comfortable sleeping in spaces like that. But because I wasn't feeling well, I slept on the outside in case I needed to throw up. At about 2 a.m., I wake up, completely unable to breathe and gasping for air. I feel like smoke is pouring into my lungs. As this is going on, there's a dark figure looming over me with hands extended towards me. When I finally comprehend what is happening, I start frantically shaking my boyfriend and repeat, "We have to go." He wakes up, panicked, and I'm all freaked out, sweating and crying. He's not someone who believes in paranormal stuff, so he just brushes it off, thinking I had a fever dream. Once I'm calmed down, I switch sides with him after begging for a few minutes and manage to go back to sleep. In the morning, I'm sitting at the table with his father, drinking coffee while my boyfriend is collecting firewood. His dad asks me how I like the house. I don't want to be rude, so I just say it's gorgeous. He goes on about how he wishes he had time to fix up the upstairs. Curious, I asked why it needs to be fixed. "Oh, a long time ago there was a fire that broke out up there. The rooms need a little TLC." After that first night, I was always scared to be left alone in the house. I'd always hear someone walking up there, and it always freaked me out. A couple years before my mom passed away, about 4 years ago, my brother and his wife had bought and moved into her father's house where she grew up. In the corner of the dining room was a built-in cabinet where my brother and his wife kept memorabilia, photos, and so on. My maternal grandmother had always told us how her sister had taken her senior yearbook, insisting it was hers, and how she hadn't seen it in decades, in part because her sister lived states away, and my grandmother isn't much of a traveler. How her brother-in-law had thrown out all her sister's belongings after she passed away many years ago, etc. Around Christmas time, after my mom's passing, my brother called me. He had been upstairs at his house and came down to the living room just off of the dining room to find his son on the couch, looking through a very old yearbook. He asked my nephew where he'd found it, and my nephew pointed to the dining room cabinet. My brother asked to look at it, and I kid you not, it was my grandmother's yearbook. Not just from the year she graduated, but it was hers. She'd written property of with her name in it and in large letters, and underneath was where her sister had written her name as if it were hers. My brother's in-laws didn't know my grandparents prior to my brother getting married. My great-aunt had moved away long before I was born in the 70s, and that yearbook had been out of the state for well over 40 years. It would have been impossible for my grandmother to have had it. I know because we had emptied my grandmother's house and moved her into a senior living complex prior to my mom passing. If we'd found the yearbook, I would have seen it, or at least known about it. How it ended up in the cabinet at my brother's is beyond any of us. There is a strip of highway near my hometown where too many car accidents have happened. It isn't curvy, it isn't bumpy. It's a straight strip of highway that, for some reason or another, has seen multiple crashes. I first became aware of these accidents when I started dating my then boyfriend. The strip of highway was between both of our places, and I never drove it until we met. One night, I was headed to his place when I saw it. I'm calling it an apparition, although I have no idea what it was. It was a white transparent essence that appeared to dive in front of my car. I know it could have been a mist, but it was fast and looked like a ghost. It startled me and I swerved the car, nearly crashing into the guardrail. I corrected last minute and straightened out, feeling grateful to be okay and making note of where it happened, so I could tell my boyfriend about it. The next time I was driving with him, I showed him the spot. He looked shocked and told me that 2 kids from his school had gone over that guardrail. One didn't survive. Now, at the time, I had no idea about this. I heard him mention the accident before, but I didn't go to his school, so didn't know any of the details of where it happened. To add to that creepiness, he also told me that his aunt had crashed her motorcycle on this spot in the highway. It was an aneurysm, so can't necessarily be chalked up to something paranormal, but it added to the eeriness. After that day, I always made a note of that guardrail when I passed it. Within a 3-month period, I noticed that the guardrail had been crashed into at least 3 more times. I saw a new crumpled spot, then the rail was replaced. Then 2 more crumpled spots occurred the next week. Overall, I don't know what was going on there. Is it unusual for a guardrail to be hit often on a straight strip of road? Or am I just noticing it because I almost hit that guardrail? Also, can mist travel quickly as if diving in front of the car, or was it something else? There might be a scientific explanation out there, but the whole thing creeps me out. This incident occurred sometime in 1982, before I joined the U.S. Air Force. Around 1982, I was in college, and we were living in a rented bottom apartment in Baguio City, Philippines. We had 1 bathroom near the entranceway. My bed was facing the door, which faced down the hallway where the bathroom is. On occasions, I would get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and this night was one of those nights. Just as I was about to get up and go to the bathroom, I see my mom, in her nightgown, pass by my door and go down the hallway to the bathroom. I was sure it was my mom because it looked like the nightgown she wears, and she had short hair exactly like my mom's. I didn't see the face, only the back of her head. My first thought was, oh great, I gotta pee and now I gotta wait for Mom. After a few minutes, Mom had not left the bathroom, and I was getting impatient because I had to pee. Finally, I called out, Mom, could you hurry it up? I gotta go pee. No response. I called out again, and still no response. Just great. So I get up and walk down the hallway to the bathroom, and saw that the bathroom door was open. I ask, Mom, are you there? Are you okay? No response. I open the door, and no one is there. I'm confused because there is no way she could have left the bathroom and gone back to bed without me seeing. I'm freaked out at this point, but I still have to pee. I go back to bed and can't get back to sleep. I asked my mom in the morning if she had gone to the bathroom last night, and she said she didn't. I later find out that the owner's niece had killed herself upstairs, and they showed me her picture, and it looked exactly like the figure I had seen. But this wasn't the only incident to happen in that house. One night, I was woken up by 3 loud slaps on the side of the dresser that was next to my bed. I mean, they were loud slaps. I was confused. This was before I had this sighting. I tried to replicate how hard you had to slap the dresser to get that sound. I found out that I had to slap that dresser very hard to replicate the slaps that had happened literally a few inches from my head. The only other incident also happened while I was in college. I was taking engineering, and I was working on my plate for my mechanical drawing class. It was late at night, but I was busy. For some reason, I looked up from my drawing to look at a shoe in front of me on the floor. The shoe suddenly moved by itself across the floor about 4 feet. I freaked out and ran out of my room and didn't bother finishing my project. But those were the only 3 incidences that I can remember from that house. Years later, my brothers and sisters would tell me that they would hear footsteps in the kitchen. What I'm about to tell you is an experience that my friends and I have lived some weeks ago, during the explosion of the TikTok trend called Randonautica, and it is quite related to it. When we first heard of this trend, we saw it as a way to try something new, to explore the boring and strange neighborhood in which I live, with the hope to see an unforgettable and creepy happening. What we saw, I'm sure, could definitely be described that way. It was dark. It was around 11 p.m. We were spent after trying to find something cool with the Randonaut app. We had tried to manifest something scary, an abandoned building or an entity, but the randomly generated points would always lead us to the countryside, and even trying to reach them was impossible as they were in private properties. After some hours, we decided to surrender and just to walk around my house, as we had never really explored those old streets, and we found a weird and chained gate that blocked the way to a huge, seemingly abandoned house. There was a couch in front of the front door, on which a black cat was comfortably sitting, and there was a dim light that came from a window that made it look as if there was someone inside. Near the couch, there were some objects from the 50s, like a basketball basket covered in rust. The atmosphere was spooky, and there were bats flying around, but we decided to keep walking until we found something that looked like a dead-end street. A street lamp started working at once, making 3 gates visible. The first gate was right at the end of the small road, the second one was on the left, and the third one, the most important one, was on the right. I saw another black cat behind the first gate, but I turned around, and after a little bit I looked back at the gate. As soon as I did that, I literally jumped after seeing a black sheet on the ground which was basically being dragged, but it quickly disappeared. I asked my friends to leave, as we had previously seen a weird shadow, who could have been someone, behind some bushes, and it was giving me anxiety. But we decided to stay and check behind the third gate. There was something strange. It was sitting against the wall as if it was at rest, and it seemed like it was holding a huge stick, even though no hands were visible. Now that I think about it, it may have looked like the Grim Reaper's sickle. A little further from it, there was an old chair, and a drawing resembling a face appeared right on the wall. It was smiling, and it had eyes, a nose, and a curved drawn line which represented a smiling mouth. There was some sort of noose close to it, on the same wall, and the house which was behind it had 5-pointed star on the balcony. After seeing this, I really felt as if we were in the wrong place. I started panicking and convinced everyone to leave, and we got back home safe, but still with many questions regarding what we saw. These questions had led us to go back to the creepy street some days later. We thought about going there in the daylight, but somehow we ended up there even later than 11 p.m., and we met a different scenery. A huge white van was resting in the exact same place where we had seen the hooded man, and the drawing on the wall wasn't there anymore. We still can't explain what we saw, and probably never will, but it's a mystery that will probably haunt us forever. This experience occurred when I was about 15 or 16. I was also with a friend of about the same age and his dad. We were in the woods behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went back into these woods many times to hike around and play paintball. One day, we decided to go a little deeper into the woods just to check it out. And here's a little bit of background. This is an old forest/protected wetlands that are a few square miles and surrounded by roads on all four sides, located in the northeast U.S. For a while, we were wandering along. It was mid to late spring, so the forest was pretty lush and green, when one of us sees a small patch of white coming out through the woods. It stood out pretty easily in contrast to the green leaves, so we decided to investigate, and the three of us headed off in the direction towards this mysterious white spot coming through the leaves. If you've ever walked through dense woods, you'll know it's difficult to walk in a straight line because of fallen logs and brush. Anyway, we keep walking towards this object for what seems like a while. I've racked my brain, but really can't recall how long. But this white object still hasn't come into focus. It still looks like a white blot, and is just as far away as when we first spotted it. We didn't think much of that at this point, or at least I didn't, and continued walking in this thing's direction. It must have happened 2 or 3 times that we'd walk towards this thing for a few minutes, stop, and notice that we still weren't getting any closer. At this point, I think there was a little tension building, but nothing too out of the ordinary. At some point, though, as we were getting closer, we noticed the object is starting to fill out. We can clearly see now it's a tiny white house on a hill. I'd say the structure was about the size of a shed you might keep your lawnmower in. We were excited because how often do you come across something like that? It's still a little ways away, but again, very obvious this little white house is what we had seen and been walking towards. So as we continue towards this little house, we lose it from sight momentarily as we go up and over another hill in front of it. But as soon as we get to the top of this hill, the small white house is gone. We're confused as hell looking at each other, but keep walking to the hill we had previously seen this house on. This last part happened pretty quickly. We get to the top of the hill, still looking at the other hills close by, to see if maybe we just got turned around or something and we'd see the little house, until one of us noticed an old foundation in the ground at the top of this hill, exactly where the house had been. The shape of the foundation was exactly the size of this mysterious vanishing white house. I barely had time to notice the foundation when all 3 of us heard a growling-like sound that got louder until it was as loud as a chainsaw. Nothing was said, but the 3 of us, including my friend's dad, sprinted out of the woods in the direction we came. I don't recall ever discussing what happened with the 2 others I was with that day. Since this happened, I tried looking on Google Maps for some kind of indication that the house was there, and we just lost it, but the forest top is too thick. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and we went back into those woods looking for the house. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and we went back into those woods looking for the house, but didn't find anything. Although our search wasn't very thorough because it was winter, so it was pretty cold, and with snow on the ground, it was hard to pick out what might be the White House from the surrounding snow. A few years ago, I made a pen pal from another state through a website. We talked a lot with very extensive and specific letters for about 1 year and some months. She told me about her childhood, her high school experience, and what she was going through at the time, her family, her house, her city, everything. One day, she tells me that she was going on a vacation and couldn't send letters, so she sent me her Instagram in case of an emergency if I wanted to talk to her. Honestly, I tried to find her on social media before, but her name and surname were too common. We were very close, and I didn't like talking to my pen pals on social media, but one day I wanted to tell her about an accomplishment I had made. I go to the user she sent me, but it didn't seem very active. She had no bio, no personal profile, and only one photo. I recognized her face because we sent pictures of each other. I opened the photo and see it was from 2016 and it had so many comments. Weird, she had almost no followers. I thought maybe this wasn't her main account anymore, but then I opened the comments. She was dead. Her comments were family members, friends she had told me about. They were all giving their condolences and saying how much they missed her. I didn't know what to think, so I tried and look up what happened to her. Apparently, someone had murdered her in early 2017, the year we started writing to each other. Thinking it was a bad joke, I keep on writing letters as if nothing happened. I asked her specifically about 2017 though, if it was a good year or not. She tells me a lot of things that happened that year and that she went out with this creepy guy for a while. I don't write to her anymore after that and haven't received any letters from her, but it still haunts me and I still don't understand what the hell happened there. I grew up in central Illinois and moved out on my own at age 19 to attend college. I had a strange experience one night in my apartment that I'm looking for some input on. The area where my college apartment was at was a bit weird, along some farmland at the very edge of the city. It's like someone just took an apartment complex and plopped it down in the middle of a cornfield. Looking out across the land, you could see nothing but field and gray skies with some wind turbines out in the distance. The whole place had this gloomy and lonely, almost forgotten vibe, and that feeling was in my apartment too, mixed with a sense of always being watched. I always felt a sense of dread when squeezing up the narrow stairways to my upstairs apartment. One day, while looking out at the sky, I saw something hovering in the distance. It was too far to make out. It just looked like a large black circle and it didn't move at all. There was no sound like you would expect from a helicopter. I'm not sure what it was, but I checked on it several times and it never moved at all. It just was kinda hanging there in the sky. After about an hour of occasional checks, I noticed that it was gone. I'm not sure if it's at all related to what comes next, but I thought it was worth mentioning since this happened not long after. The story at hand happened one night when my long-distance boyfriend, now husband, was visiting. He knew how much I hated being so far from everyone and living in this gloomy place. So he'd spend the night a couple nights a week between my classes, internship, and waitressing job. We were up late as usual in bed, just having a conversation. And that was when it happened. Out of nowhere at 3 a.m., there was an instant and palpable sense of dread. Not like the usual sense of gloom we always had here, but bone-chilling dread. If you've never experienced this, it might seem like a feeling is hardly worth writing a story on, but I think that humans instinctively know when a predator is there, even if your eyes can't see it. We were mid-conversation, and suddenly everything in the air shifted. It was as if the most evil thing possible was at the foot of our bed, coming closer. Whatever it was invisible to the naked eye, but we both instinctively knew it was there. It had us both paralyzed with fear. Both of us, lying still in the bed, started silently praying, calling on God that whatever this invisible force was to leave us alone. The hairs on the back of our neck stood up. We could sense it there, staring back at us. And suddenly, in a blink of an eye, the street lamp outside my window blew out, and the feeling was gone. It's like whatever it was flew over us and out of the apartment. There was an instant release and a huge wave of relief. Then all of the other street lamps at the complex went out all at once. It was gone as soon as it came. If you were observing us in that moment, you'd just see two people sitting up in bed relaxing. There was nothing that either of us did to tip the other off as to what we were experiencing, but we both turned to each other after the street lamps went out, and recalled the same paralyzing fear and sense of doom we had never experienced before. Whatever this was, it was certainly there to cause us harm, and I believe that it was able to manipulate electrical systems due to my light burning out. I have never experienced that type of terror since, or ever had a similar occurrence. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts, or has experienced the same thing. I was about 18 years old when this took place, so only a couple of years ago. One of my best friends, let's call him Nick, used to live a couple towns over. It was the summer right after we graduated, and we used to hang out all the time. So there was a solid month or two where I would go to his neighborhood, and we would smoke for hours on end in my car. His neighborhood was a very quaint suburban area with lots of old people living there. We had a couple of spots we would regularly park for our sessions, and sometimes we would use this somewhat popular forest trail at the front of his neighborhood. You would see lots of people running, walking, or biking through there throughout the day. One evening, we decided that we would smoke on this trail. This wasn't out of the ordinary for us at this point. We walked maybe a mile and a half into this trail and casually chatted and joked around as friends do. Eventually we found a bench where we sat down and started smoking and talking about our days and topics of our interest. We saw a middle-aged gentleman briefly jog by us as we sat on the bench. That was the only person we saw during our walk through the trail. By the time we finished smoking, the sun has already gone down and it was getting dark, so we mentioned going back to the car to keep rolling up and continuing our session. We started walking back the way we came from. Nick and I were talking about whatever. I can't remember what we were talking about, since it was casual and we've already gotten into the routine of just shooting the shit all the time. Eventually, as we continued walking, it became eerily darker. So dark I couldn't see much, and I was trying to allow my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I got to a point where my eyes were adjusted to it, so the trail had a more bluish hint to it instead of a pitch black, kind of like how horror movies try portraying the night, although the forest line around us in the distance was still so dark you couldn't see into it. As Nick and I were making our way through the trail, we got to a point where the trail was straight, with a bend at the end of it, cutting off our vision from the rest of the path. Couldn't have been any further than 150, 200 feet where the cutoff seemed to be. Nick was on my right side as we were chatting, shoulder to shoulder, walking at the same pace. As we were walking, a small beam of light seemed to be cutting through the dark shroud of trees ahead of us, slightly to the left of the trail, still in front of us, but not on the pathway. In my head, without any concern of the light, I assumed it was the moonlight reflecting off the riverbank to the right of us, but as we continued walking towards it, I noticed that the beam of light was moving as well. I was talking at this moment, and as my eyes began locking onto this figure, my words slowly started to drift away into a dead silence. To my surprise, Nick was also locked on this weird light figure. Our pace slowed down as we were quietly watching this figure emerging from the forest. It was a whitish gray figure that seemed unfazed by the ground as it was moving in our direction in the distance. Nick eventually broke our silence and asked me, "Do you see that?" He knew I was looking at it as well. Neither Nick or I are religious or believe in spirits, and my brain started to try to come up with the most logical answer, so I quickly replied, "I think it's just the moonlight." To which he responded, "I don't think so." Now, the figure was maybe 60 feet away, and we could tell it was a human shape. It had legs. It had shoulders that moved in the pace of its stride, although not seeming to be fazed by the pitch-black ground beneath it. I started to get scared. It looked like a woman in a white dress walking towards us with white legs, arms, and head, although no hair could be seen. Knowing all too well what that means in horror movies, my mind began racing for a more rational conclusion. I thought to myself, well, maybe it's a man in a white coat walking on the trail, but that only left me with the question as to why a man would be walking into the trail this late at night. My heart began pounding as this woman with a white glow started coming closer and closer. I tried so hard to make a face out in the night, but I could only see the distinct white figure of her. She had the glow of the moon. Everything from head to toe was all white. Nick and I, at this point, halted in our tracks at the same time, locking onto this glowing woman who was walking directly into our path. We could tell that if she were to continue walking towards us, she would have to walk through us. She was dead center on the path, continuously walking closer and closer. At this point, I was so terrified and completely suspended in disbelief. Besides the odd occasion of a door shutting at random in my house, I have never seen what seemed to be a spirit, so clearly I could see this woman in a dress. Although I was scared out of my mind, an overwhelming sense of tranquility was coming over me, like I had nothing to be afraid of. The woman became so close, she couldn't have been more than 20, maybe 30 feet in front of us at this moment. So close you could guess her height, which was tall enough to be somewhat eye level with me, yet no eyes or distinct facial features besides possibly the shape of a nose. I can't begin to express how clear and close the woman got to us. Dead in our tracks, eyes locked on her, we sat there silently watching her getting ready to walk in between us. Without any thought to it, simultaneously Nick and I locked eyes with each other. The look of horror and confusion in his eyes reassured me he was seeing the same thing as me as he quickly blurted out, "Dude, what is that?" We quickly shot our eyes back in front of us, and before we could even prepare for her, she was gone. Completely vanished, as if there wasn't an all-white glowing woman walking no further than 20 feet ahead of us. We began speed walking in silence. Neither of us wanted to seem scared at first. So much was running through my mind, just trying to comprehend what was happening. Eventually I spoke up. All I said was, "Let's go." And we both started running as fast as we could without one of us getting ahead of the other. I lost track of how far in we were at that point, but it was definitely more than a half-mile in. But as fast as we ran, it seemed we were at the end of the trail within seconds. This whole ordeal was probably around only a minute long, but from the sheer horror, it felt like time came to a standstill. We quickly got into my car parked near the trail entrance, and I hightailed it back to his house. Nick began saying, "Bro, what just happened? We both saw that, right?" And we began confirming with each other everything we just witnessed. We asked, what did we see? Why did we see her? Why did she show herself to us? What does this mean? My understanding of reality was completely altered. It felt like such a dystopian reality when it occurred, like we stumbled into a limbo of some sort. To this day, I have no idea what else it could have been. It was so real, and the area became so unnatural when this happened. What creeps me out the most, and comforts my sanity, is that we both saw it. We both saw a woman in a dress glowing white walking towards us with an unfazed, uninterrupted stride, like it wasn't actually walking on the ground. We didn't hear footsteps or anything. I suggested that, due to there being a lot of old folks who live in that area, that it was the spirit of someone who once lived there and possibly enjoyed the trail in their youth. I have also heard that the area was a popular grounds during the Civil War. Nick and I reminisce occasionally about our experience, and have even attempted going back with the intentions of seeing her again. However, when we did, I was overwhelmed with a gut feeling to turn back around before we saw something we really didn't want to see again. Since then, I've been more open to the idea of spirits and still can't really wrap my head around what we saw. We tell this story to our friends and loved ones, but when we do, it doesn't have the same surrealness to it. They usually laugh it off as yet another wild story, rather than a truly reality-warping experience. Many years ago, when I was in college, I lived with my brother off and on. The house had a downstairs with the living room, dining room, kitchen, and master bedroom, and an upstairs with the kids' room on one side, a bathroom on the other, and a bit of space in between in front of the stairs. It wasn't really big enough to be called a room, but it wasn't exactly a hallway. They set up a futon for me, and that became my area. I remember thinking that the upstairs felt a little off, especially my niece's room. After a few months, I started sleeping on the couch downstairs, partly because the kids would disturb me in the morning, but also because I never felt right up there. There were several strange things that happened while I lived there. One night, my brother, sister-in-law, niece, nephew, and I were at the table eating dinner. From upstairs, we heard one of my niece's talking dolls say something like, "I want to play with you." It sounds like horror movie cliche bullshit, I know, but it was extremely unsettling when it happened in real life. No one else was in the house, and they didn't have any pets. Another time, my niece was coming down the stairs when she suddenly fell. I remember thinking it was really strange because it didn't look like she tripped. It was more like she had been pushed. Her necklace had broken during the fall, but not at the clasp. The strings had just broken like someone yanked it off. Then, one night, while I was still sleeping upstairs, I woke up and felt really uneasy. I think it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. Since the kids' rooms were across from the bathroom, they had to walk through my area to get from one to the other. I opened my eyes and saw what looked like someone in a pink bathrobe go into the bathroom. I didn't recall my niece having a pink bathrobe, so I thought it was kind of strange. After a while, when no lights had switched on and I didn't hear the sink or the toilet flushing, I started to get up to go see if anyone was in there. But I got this really bad feeling that I should just leave it alone. In the morning, I asked my niece if she had a pink bathrobe, and I asked both my niece and nephew if either of them had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They both said no. Sometime later, I mentioned the whole thing to my sister-in-law. She asked me if my brother had told me to say that. I was confused and said, "No, why?" She told me that when they had first moved in, she kept having this dream that there was a lady in a pink bathrobe sitting in the living room. They kept telling her to leave, but she wouldn't. Then one night, she dreamed that the lady was in the doorway of her room, screaming, and then flew at her and started choking her. A while after all this happened, my sister-in-law went around the house saying, "Okay, lady, I know you're here." Then she had the dream of moving in again, and this time they put the boxes all around her instead of telling her to leave. I moved out shortly after, but the incidents most likely stopped after that as far as I know. My sister-in-law said that they just had to learn to live with her. This occurred when I was about 11 or 12. I'm 28 now, and I was staying the night at my friend Danny's house, who lived just a few houses down from mine. There was a large pond behind our neighborhood, and we spent a lot of time there growing up. We'd go fishing, ride bikes, explore the small forest, etc. But we really enjoyed catching turtles and tree frogs. Might sound weird, but what can I say? We had somewhat of an obsession with reptiles and amphibians. Another thing I should note is that there was an old Native American trail that went through all the backyards of our street. It wasn't the Trail of Tears, but it was related to it in some way. I don't really remember. Back to the story. I was up late playing video games with Danny, and after a while we wanted to do something else. It was close to midnight, but we decided to go out and try catching some tree frogs. A family that lived in a nearby house had gone on vacation, and they had a perfect backyard for catching frogs. We hopped their fence and started exploring. Almost immediately, I started getting a weird feeling. I had the feeling we were being watched or something was nearby, and there was this odd energy in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but something just felt off. I remember feeling afraid, but I had no reason to be. We had done this kind of thing many times before, and it never inspired fear. About 10 minutes in, we thought we heard the frog saying, "Help me," in a croaky, froggy voice over and over again. The weird thing is, we couldn't see any tree frogs with our flashlights, and the yard wasn't that big. They started chanting in unison, and that made it much louder. Feeling more than a little creeped out, we bolted out of there and back to the street. Now we were standing under a streetlight on the street corner across from where the frog house was. I looked up at the light and noticed at least 15 dragonflies attached to each other like the human centipede. They were doing a spiraling motion as they flew closer and closer to the light. It was weird. So we heard or saw 2 unusual things, but you could possibly explain them away. What happened next, however, made absolutely zero sense. After the dragonflies did their thing and flew away, Danny and I remained standing under that streetlight. We began talking about the strangeness of the frogs in particular. We both heard them croaking the same phrase, and we were pretty much just saying, "What the hell was that about?" At some point during the conversation, I was instantly overcome with the most intense adrenaline rush I've had in my life. That feeling of fear without a source while at the frog house was back, but much, much stronger. It was like my fight or flight response was signaled for no reason. Once again, everything felt off, and it felt like there was an intense energy all around us making the air heavy. I was terrified, and I found out later my buddy was feeling the same thing. I became as still as possible, listening intently to my surroundings. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I suddenly began to feel drawn to look at the street behind me. I knew something was there. Whatever was behind me was the source of my fear, and it was putting out overwhelming energy with its presence alone. I hesitantly turned around and looked. In the middle of the street, about 20 yards away from us, There was an ordinary-looking 5 to 7-year-old girl with long, dark black hair wearing a white nightgown. She was sitting Indian-style on the street pavement with a doll in her lap, and she was combing the doll's hair with a hairbrush. I was pretty much terrified beyond imagination. I was frozen with fear and could barely think straight. There was an incredible amount of energy in the air, and I knew something wasn't natural. She looked innocent enough, but I felt like she could snap me in half with a snap of her fingers if she wanted to. Another creepy detail was that she never even looked at us. She kept her head down and focused on her doll, but she definitely knew we were there watching her. After what felt like an hour, realistically probably 15 to 30 seconds, a car turned onto the street and began heading down the hill towards the girl. I remember the headlights getting brighter and brighter as it approached her. You would think maybe I would try to save her real quick, but I legitimately couldn't move. Also, I didn't really expect her to get hit for some reason. I never felt like she was in any sort of danger. Eventually, she became lost in the car's headlights, never looking up from her doll this whole time, by the way, and the car just passed right through her without any sound of a collision. It stopped at the stop sign 15 feet from us and made a right turn. We took our eyes off of where the girl was as we watched the car turn. When we looked back to where the girl had been, she was gone. Instead, there was a dog on the sidewalk precisely parallel to where the girl was sitting in the street. The dog was looking right at me when I noticed it, almost like it was waiting for me to see it. Then, it just turned around a corner and trotted up the hill in the other direction. After a few seconds, the shock wore off and we sprinted back to Danny's house and spent half the night looking out his second-story window towards the street. I don't know what I saw, but Danny saw the exact same thing. I've always felt like there was a reason it happened, or a reason it showed itself, whatever it was, to us of all people. Last thing, the house in front of where the girl was seen was haunted. I lived on that street for 10 years, and 4 to 5 different families lived in the haunted house during those 10 years. All of them said it was haunted. I have a couple stories about that too, but this is already way longer than I wanted it to be. Please let me know if you have any theories on my experience. In 1995, my late husband and I moved into our home in Seattle. We met at a laboratory we worked at, and were not believers in the paranormal. In fact, I'm still an atheist. The house was built in 1926, and had not been renovated at all, other than the appliances. I decided we should put an exercise room in the huge basement, as our home was too small to put equipment anywhere else. Around that time, I started to notice that things would go missing, and then we would find those things in very weird places. For example, my husband was cooking and I was in the tub. He came in and asked if I had taken the measuring cup. I had gotten into the bath before he started cooking and had not budged. He said he had it right next to him and had turned away to do something, but when he turned back, it was gone. I got out of the tub, put my robe on, and went into the living room, next to the kitchen. My eye caught the sight of the fireplace mantle's glass cabinet door, which was ajar, and the measuring cup was on the shelf in the cabinet. I thought my husband was playing some prank on me, but he swore he didn't do it. And around that time, keys and small items would go missing and turn up right where I left them. And then there was the toilet paper. We had cats, one of whom liked to pee on the bath mat, so we religiously kept the door shut. It was a habit, and neither one of us ever left it open. Every few weeks, sometimes months, I would open the door to the bathroom to find that the toilet paper had been unrolled in a chevron pattern all the way across the floor. Even if it somehow unrolled on its own, there was no way it would be in a pattern all across the bathroom. It was then that we became convinced someone was living with us. I made a reservation at La Posada in Santa Fe, so we could go there for a long weekend. It was purportedly haunted, and I wanted to see if anything similar would happen somewhere else. Now, this part still blows me away. I had told a friend about our trip, and one day I came home early from work and flipped on the TV. An episode of Unsolved Mysteries was on, and the hotel I was going to was being featured. The show was at least 10 years old, and it was on a channel I rarely watched. I was shocked at the coincidence. Right then, my friend calls me and says he just turned on his TV, and it was on Unsolved Mysteries and was showing my hotel room. He had also come home early and did not watch this channel. Well, we went on the trip, and all was quiet the first night. But on the second night, something crazy happened. My mom and stepdad came with us, but we were staying in a casita about 10 minutes away. They came to the main building, which had been a grand home built in the mid-1800s. It was purportedly haunted by the wife of the man who built it. We were playing board games and smoking cigars in the game room, which is directly below Julia's room, the supposedly haunted room we were sleeping in. A waitress walked by my dad and spilled a drink on him. My husband said he would go get one of his own shirts since my stepdad's casita was a good distance away. He left us, then came back a minute later, completely excited. He told us we had to go to the room, and I grabbed a staff member to come with us. When we walked in, I knew why he was so excited. The room was just reeking of rose perfume. I mean, it was so strong I had to step out to catch my breath. I asked the staff member if anyone had gone into our room. She said no, they were not allowed to do that unless it was housekeeping. But this was 9 at night. She then told us Julia gets upset when people smoke cigars, and this happens when she smells the smoke. Well, when my husband and I returned from our trip to La Posada, activity in our home ramped up dramatically. Most notably, the unraveled toilet paper prank happened more often. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that my husband was doing this, but he was out of town a lot, and it happened even then. One night, we went out to dinner with some friends on a Sunday evening. We got home about 10 p.m. We were both pretty tired, so decided to go straight to bed as it was a school night. I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and nothing was amiss. We turned off the lights downstairs and went up the stairs. He was right behind me. I ran to the bed and jumped in over the footboard. At the exact moment I landed, the TV turned on. It was on a channel we had not been on. We had watched SNL the night before. Not only was it on a different channel, but it was playing an old scary movie I remembered watching as a kid, called Don't Look Now. I couldn't believe it was playing, but my husband didn't care about the movie. He wanted to know how the TV turned on. I said I must have landed on the remote and started looking around for it myself. Then he told me not to bother. He pointed to his nightstand, and there it was, a good 15 feet away from him and about 6 feet from me. I knew he didn't turn it on because our TV was a piece of shit. And the on-off button, if it was on the box, was well hidden enough that I had never laid eyes on it. There was a plastic flap at the base of it, and I found out later that you had to reach your fingers underneath it and push a button on the underside of the TV. Anyhow, I thought he had turned on the TV, so I asked him how he turned it on without the remote. But he insisted he didn't do it, and because he didn't have the remote and was also standing about 6 feet away from the TV, I believed him. He was visibly shaken, and it had still not sunk in for me. He didn't turn it on, and I didn't turn it on. It was also a different channel. My brain was still thinking it must just be some electrical malfunction and was no big deal. I grabbed the remote and studied it for a few minutes, trying to find a stuck button or some logical explanation. But it looked fine. I used it to turn off the TV with no problem. Being a skeptic too, he didn't go into the must-be-ghost mode, but decided that someone must be in the house and decided to do a sweep. He had been in the army and had very bad PTSD, so I knew he would feel better. Not being a total moron, I told him I would come with him. On our way out of the bedroom, I tossed the remote on the bed and followed him downstairs. When we walked into the kitchen, all the lights were on, and all the cabinets were open. We definitely did not leave it like that when we went to bed. He was starting to really freak out, and so was I. I now agreed that someone must be in the house, but because of the toilet paper incidences, My mind started to wander if it wasn't something else. We left the kitchen and went into the living room. The light was on in there too, and the chandelier was swinging wildly. I went over to it and reached up to stop it from moving, and felt this kind of static electricity underneath it. That could have been my nerves, but to this day it remains the strangest sensation I have ever had. We decided to continue through the house, and he said he was going to check out the basement. We walked down the hall to the basement door, and I told him to hang on because we had walked past the closed bathroom door, and I wanted to see if someone was in there. I cracked open the door, turned on the light, and saw that the toilet paper was once again unrolled in a chevron pattern across the floor. I shut the door as this was the least of our problems at the moment. My husband then started to go down the basement stairs, when he let out a yelp and quickly did an about-face and came right back up again. He was shaking and said something cold had just gone through his body. He was really upset, and I had never seen him so frightened. We had one more room to go, and because he was freaking out, I told him I'd go in by myself. It was our guest bedroom, and it was just a few feet from the basement door. I reached over to turn the knob, and all of the door hardware fell out. I was left holding a doorknob and was sort of frozen in shock. That was the strangest part for me so far. How could all the hardware have been loosened just enough to fall out when the doorknob was turned? The door opened because no hardware, but nothing in the room itself looked off. So we decided to go back to our bedroom to try to calm down and get some sleep. He was behind me as we went back upstairs, and when we walked back into the bedroom, the TV was on again. I know I turned it off, and I know he had not been in the room since we left it. Whatever had done all the stuff downstairs had been in our room, and I could not find the remote anywhere. I scoured that room but found nothing. My husband thought I might have taken it downstairs, so we decided to go back down to look for it. I guess we could have just unplugged the TV, but I wanted to know where that remote was. He walked out of the room and I was following him. I caught sight of something shiny in the cat litter box. It was a covered box, but the light was hitting something metallic. So I went over and took the cover off. It was the remote control. Yes, my TV remote was buried in the litter box. After everything else that happened that night, this is what put me in a panic. Someone was clearly having fun scaring us, and they were there right now. Many years ago, my boyfriend at the time and I loved to go hiking. We were both artists and would take our sketchbooks along, often spending many hours in one location along a hike. Because my grandfather owned an 1840 stone farmhouse on many, many acres far out into the country, we decided to go there for a hike one day. The area is beautiful with rolling hills and plentiful forests. We got to the top of one particular hill and the scene was breathtaking, so we sat down and began to draw. In the period we spent there, we would occasionally hear drum beats coming from what seemed far away. I assumed it was someone playing music very loudly that was echoing through the hills, the rest of the music having been diminished by distance and muffled by trees, with only the bass drum remaining. We were in a remote location, but there were a few homes throughout the valleys our view afforded, and I really didn't give it too much thought, instead focusing on my drawing and surroundings. At some point we decided to head back. When we reached the last hill that led down to the main part of the property, I became aware of a very close-sounding, slow drum beat, as if someone was directly behind me with a single, deep drum, striking with each step I took. We were in the midst of a large field with only a few bushes of some sort speckling the field. I continued walking, thinking perhaps my heavy-duty backpack's unsecured flap was striking the bag with each step, but this seemed unlikely to be producing such a sound, so I stopped walking as a way to test my theory. But the drumming continued, coming from right behind me. I froze, but after a minute of listening to that drumming, I slowly turned expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing. Not even a nearby bush someone could be hiding in. This scared me more than if I had actually turned to find someone there. I took off running, and in turn, so did my boyfriend. Neither of us could come up with a decent explanation. It's been more than 20 years, but I can still hear that drum beat. That evening, I anxiously awaited for my dad to come home. When he came through the door, the first thing I asked him was, "When you were a kid, did you ever hear anything in the hills around Papa's house?" And without hesitation, he responded with, "You mean like drum beats?" Yep, my dad had heard them too. He and his siblings also found many arrowheads while growing up and exploring the land. This area was once populated by the Seneca Nation. It was horrifically purged under George Washington's orders in what we know as the Sullivan Campaign in 1779. In fact, local history books refer to a large creek near my grandfather's house as Bloody Creek for this reason. This occurred around 1990 at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, while I was stationed there as a radio operator. I worked in Building 829 high-frequency receiver site. The building was surrounded by the antenna field, so it was clear all the way around. It was located about a mile off the main road. Not everyone had cars back then, and many people just took the base shuttle bus and walked down the road to the building. It was not uncommon to see people walking up and down the road during shift change. I picked up my friend Derek from off base since we were both living off base at the time. It was around 18-15 hours and we were halfway down the road, heading towards the receiver site. Usually, if I saw someone walking towards the building, I would give them a lift the rest of the way in. So here we were driving on that road, not full daylight, but you could still see everything, and there was no grass tall enough to hide someone. As I'm driving, I see a person walking towards the building, so I think to myself that I would give this guy a lift. I could see the person pretty well. It was a male wearing a white shirt and blue jeans. As the car gets to within 50 feet, the person simply vanishes in front of my eyes. I was too shocked to say anything, and I was not about to say anything to my friend in the passenger seat. Then Derek says, "Did you see that? Where did the guy go?" I responded, "Yeah, I did. I wasn't going to say anything, though." So I stopped the car and we both got out to see where the guy went. Nothing. There was no one else but us, and no one else walking down the road. We got back in the car and drove into work. Later on, I kept saying that we saw a ghost, but Derek refused to admit it. He would only say that we saw something, but would not say it was a ghost. That was my only visual sighting at Clark, but there was another unexplainable incident that happened at that building. So, this is one of the many stories I have. I never considered myself psychic or sensitive until a few years ago when I found out stories like mine weren't common with everyone else. Before I can tell the story, I have to give some background. Bear with me. My brother and I have different dads. Unfortunately, his dad passed away a year prior to when this story is set. My mom and his dad did not do well together. He wasn't a bad guy, just troubled and really didn't know how to be a good partner. My mom said that after they separated and she met my dad and got pregnant with me, my brother's dad said, "You finally got the girl you always wanted." This was something she had told him when they were together, that she always wanted a daughter, but obviously they didn't stay together to have another kid. When I was little, he was always really sweet to me. Not in a creepy way, just always interested and asking how I am. My mom said she felt like he always felt drawn to me. Maybe because he regretted the end of his relationship with her, and I in some way made him think of what could have been. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, so moving on to the story. A few weeks after my brother's dad died, I had a dream that I was in a hallway with him. He told me he was okay and that he wanted to show me something. He grabbed a door handle, opened the door, and the brightest light came through. But then I woke up. I so wish I could remember what he showed me, or if he did show me anything at all. Okay, now fast forward in time. It was Christmas Eve, 2009, a year later. I was upstairs in my bedroom and I heard music playing. We had a room next to mine with all kinds of toys because I had a lot of nieces and nephews that came over. I assumed the music was coming from there, so I walked into the room to check. It was not coming from that room, and I realized it was coming from the bathroom. The bathroom? Odd, I thought. I went in there and realized the music was coming from a 3-tier box, each tier with a drawer where my mom kept jewelry and other keepsakes. As soon as I touched the box, the music abruptly stopped. I was 21 at this time, and in all the years of living with my parents, I had never heard music come from this box, and she has had it my entire life. I go downstairs and tell my mom the weirdest thing just happened, and I tell her the story. Her face goes completely white. She looks totally freaked out, and her eyes well up with tears. She then tells me that that is a jewelry box that her ex-husband, my brother's dad who died, gave her on their wedding day. She said it hasn't played music in 35 years because it broke. We even went upstairs to try to recreate the music and get it to work with no luck. I just smiled and shrugged and said, "Well, I guess he's saying Merry Christmas." I don't know why he chooses me to go through for these messages. We weren't close. But I do think part of it is that he knows I won't brush things off as my brain or something weird. I feel they're from him, and he knows I'll share the message. My brother pretty much hasn't been very receptive to the messages, and I don't want to make him feel uncomfortable or upset him. Sorry that this is so long, but wanted to share as it's special to me. I wanted to share a ghost experience I had as a college freshman this past year. During this past year as a freshman in college, I had some unexplained experiences that I believe may have been ghosts. This will be a little bit longer story since this is multiple experiences I had over the course of a semester. I lived in the oldest dorm building of this old small college in Pennsylvania that I'm choosing not to name. Right off the bat, those unexplainable experiences started. Move-in day came, I met my roommate, unpacked, and got the room set up. That night I could barely sleep. In the far corner of the room there were 2 closets built into the wall, and also where my roommate had decided to put her desk. From that corner, I felt like someone was watching me. It wasn't a vague feeling either. It felt like someone was staring holes into me. I chalked it up to feeling uneasy in new surroundings and did my best to fall asleep. They had been roommates the year before and lived in one of the rooms that neighbored the dorm I was living in. They explained the weird stuff they had experienced while living there. Things being moved around and lights turning on in the middle of the night on multiple occasions. My high school friend confirmed this, and she had been living only a few rooms down from them when all this happened. After hearing this, I did some research later that night. I found the same story from a different website. Back when the college was an all-boys school, a young man had, unfortunately, killed himself on the same floor in the same building where I was living. I would be lying if I said I wasn't spooked, but I tried to brush off the fear. I also jokingly renamed the ghost Patrick, since the girls who lived on the floor before had been calling the ghost Patricia, assuming it was a girl since it was an all-girls floor. I didn't have another experience with Patrick for about another month, but other girls on my floor kept complaining about hearing bumps and footsteps at night, as well as stable objects falling off of shelves and wall hangings being knocked down. The second really weird experience I had with Patrick came in late September. I was sitting at my desk in my dorm, which sits right by the door to the room. I originally heard a knock at my door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I asked the girls across the hallway who had their door open if they had seen anyone knock or if they had knocked. They told me they hadn't knocked and didn't see anyone, but had been hearing weird things all afternoon. I went back to my dorm and kept my door cracked in case anyone knocked again. That's when things got really strange. As I'm sitting at my desk, I heard my door start to creak open a little. I expected my roommate to come in, but the door didn't finish opening before shutting again. I sat and watched as the door creaked open about half an inch and then closed. then opened an inch and closed, then opened an inch and a half and closed, then opened 2 inches and closed. Then the door swung open about 6 inches before slamming shut. I ran into the hallway to see if someone was playing a prank on me, but no one was there. I checked the windows at each end of the hallway. Both were closed. Those dorm doors were really heavy, and wind wouldn't be able to normally move them at all either. I sat in my dorm and tried to rationalize what it could have been, but nothing came to mind. I ended up telling Patrick that I had studying to do, and if he could leave me alone, that would be appreciated. About halfway through October, our RA told us an experience she had with Patrick. She had repeatedly heard knocking coming from the inside of her closet, and thought it was the girls on the other side of the wall. When she asked the other girls about it, they expressed the same concern and confusion, and explained that they thought our RA had been the one knocking. Then Halloween rolled around, and I had my third major weird experience. I had been up studying the night before Halloween, and before I went to bed I had turned my laptop all the way off, but left the lid open. Later, I was woken up by a bright light shining in my face. I opened my eyes and looked at my desk where my laptop was. The light was coming from my laptop, and the screen read October 31st, 12 a.m. I was too tired to respond appropriately and just mumbled, "Damn it, Patrick," before rolling over and going back to sleep. The next morning, it fully hit me what happened. I told my boyfriend back home about the experience. He joked that maybe Patrick just wanted to play some Halloween prank. My boyfriend also experienced some of the weird things I had been dealing with at school, both when he came up to visit and when we would FaceTime. He would approach the situations in a joking manner, saying that Patrick must have been lonely and wanted some attention. Finally, the fourth major experience I had was in mid-November. I had been up later than I should have been, studying for an exam. I went to use the bathroom before I went to bed. While in the restroom, I heard footsteps marching in circles by the stalls. This scared me because of how loud the footsteps were, but also because I had never heard anyone come in. The door to the restroom is even heavier than the dorm doors, and it creaked very loudly when opened. It's impossible to open or close that door without making any sound, and I heard absolutely nothing before the footsteps started. I was the only one in the restroom when I had entered as well. I never had any more major experiences with Patrick after that. My second semester was cut short by the pandemic, and I think Patrick had his fun and then left me alone. Whoever ends up being dorm mates with Patrick next, I wish you luck. This happened yesterday in rural Devon. My partner and I live on top of a valley that has a train line running through it, about 150 feet below us, a large field and a river on one side of it, and a smaller field and a road on the other side. It goes from a small town to a city, and the train runs every hour. Last night, my partner and I were arguing. I was stood by the window, and then we heard the train. Occasionally, it hits the horn to warn people that it's there, because the train line has had a lot of work done to it over the last year. But last night, it was a different sound. It was louder, as if it was in the room with us, and not the usual "I'm here" horn. It was drawn out. I instantly turned and saw the train derail into the large field. I swore loudly and turned in horror to stare at my partner. He jumped up because he heard the sound too, and ran to the window to see what had happened. The train hadn't crashed. It was a few hundred meters down the line. I said, "Oh, I thought it was about to derail," obviously very confused at what I saw. But the more I think about it, the more I know I saw it. I can't make up that level of horror, fear, and overwhelming sadness I suddenly felt. Has anyone else seen anything like this? Our area isn't known for weird stuff. On moors, yes, but we're 40 minutes from them. This story takes place in 2017. It isn't a very eventful story as far as paranormal encounters go, but I personally find those to be the most believable. I actually created an account just to share this and have it all written down. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would just eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much of what she said next. "I'm going to use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with a feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall less than a foot away from my face as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was and how I hoped Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes pass like this when suddenly the bed dips on the side I'm not occupying, as if someone was getting on it. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get on my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it was breathing too. The atmosphere was still suffocating in the room, filled with what only I can describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger, don't move, I'll hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yes?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area I felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad's a vet, so he's not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude occurred before, though, just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me or my dad since. A few years ago at Tulsa Tech, where I attended nursing classes while in high school senior year, I would have breakfast every morning with my best friend and her guy friends from the engineering program in the school cafeteria before class. I stuck to the main crappy campus cafeteria despite nursing having its own, because they were so stuck up in that posh nursing cafeteria, and I'm pretty laid back. Plus I wanted to eat with my best friend. The cafeteria had double doors that connected to the banquet hall, which always had the lights off and no one ate in as it was reserved for special events. You had to go through the doors in the banquet hall to get to a hallway where the restrooms were. So every morning I would walk through the dark banquet hall to get to the restrooms, because I wouldn't get a chance to pee for another few hours and I was pregnant, and back to the cafeteria. The hall was lit and super close, so I wasn't fumbling around in the pitch dark, but it was certainly not light enough to want to hang out in that room. One morning I started to notice this teenage guy with mid-length black hair cut into an emo style over his face, and black emo-type clothes sitting at one of the round tables in the dark banquet room. It was a little creepy, but I got used to this every morning and just thought he was someone who liked to be alone, although I never approached him, which is odd because I usually always say hi to everyone no matter how they look or act just to be polite. But he felt like death. One morning, I'll never forget. I went to the restroom. He was there in his usual spot. I came out of the restroom and he's gone. Odd. I walk back through the doors into the cafeteria to sit down with my best friend and her friends. And as I look up, my heart stops. Emo Kid is sitting wedged in the tiniest space just a tiny bit between two of the guys. No one seems to notice him. He's just sitting, shoulders slouched, head somewhat down, long hair over his face, and the usual zipped-up jacket with hoodie and skinny jeans. I couldn't bring myself to look into his face, as I never had before and had never been this close. I just ate quickly with my head down and told my best friend I was done if she was. As we walked away, he stayed there. My best friend and the guys are acting normal, chatting and laughing, and I tell her, "I didn't know you guys were friends with the kid who sits in the banquet hall." She looks at me, totally confused. "What? Who?" I'm like, "The emo kid. He was barely sitting in between your two friends." She was like, "No one was at our table but us." We argued over it, and she just kept looking at me crazy, denying it. I thought they were playing a prank on me, but the guys looked just as confused. I didn't know any of her guy friends well enough, and thought it must be a prank, but I never saw the emo kid again after that, and they all swore no one was sitting at the table but us. Forever freaked out over that one. So my ghost encounter occurred about a year and a half ago, and it's a bit of a long story. I'm a law enforcement officer, so as such I was tasked with sitting in on an inmate for the night who was in the hospital ICU. The night started much like any other night of hospital duty, but the ICU being as it is, the quietness was quickly replaced with alarms, and nurses and doctors running into an adjacent room to attend to the individual. Soon, the nurses and doctors and ICU returned to normal operation. The alarms and commotion from the adjacent room returned to the quietness that existed prior. The alarms and commotion from the adjacent room returned to the quietness that existed prior. I gazed across the hall and noticed that the nursing staff had drawn the blinds and closed the sliding door that leads into that room. I didn't think too much of this and continued on with my duty of overseeing the inmate. The inmate was sedated and nobody else in the room. Shortly after the incident in the adjacent room, I observed the motion-activated sink in my room turn on out of nowhere. I found this quite odd, but chalked it up to a faulty sink. 5 minutes or so went by, and I observed the sink do it again. Then I looked across the hall and noticed hospital staff pushing a bed out of the room with an obvious body being covered by a sheet and blanket. Upon the deceased individual being removed from ICU, I did not experience the motion-activated sink turning on again. This was definitely the oddest thing I've experienced while on hospital duty. So, I just want to start by saying, I never tell anyone this story as it reveals a past about myself I do not want to acknowledge or think about. I was young and stupid. However, I think it would be beneficial for me to put it out there in writing. I was raised in a family that never once dismissed the paranormal. In fact, we all kind of reveled in it. I mean, hell, I remember at 8 years old, my freaking grandma bought me my first ever ghost book called The Everything Ghost Book. So, needless to say, I was pretty much always a weird kid. My family had always been superstitious, and even sensitive to a point. My mom would say things like, "I have a feeling I'm going to see this person today." And like clockwork, she would run into them somehow. My first real experience started 10 years ago when I was 16 years old. My mom had found a cheap foreclosed house in a ridiculously small town called Ponce de Leon in Missouri, or as I like to call it, Misery. Naturally, she fell in love with the house. My mom, my older sister, and I moved in not long after. I was homeschooled at this time, and I was not happy about moving to such a small rural area. When I say small, I mean I could literally walk to the town post office right around the corner, as well as the town church. Not to mention you had to drive up a few hills to even get cell reception. Although I didn't share my mom's excitement about the move, the quaint town was kind of beautiful. It had a strange little cemetery and many natural springs and waterfalls, as the town name suggests. We soon realized after moving in that the neighbors were pretty close-knit. Upon conversation with one of them, my mom found out a few things about the house. It was built in the 1950s, and in the 1980s they started an add-on, and it was turned into the Baptist preacher's parsonage, or church house provided for a member of the clergy. This is the same preacher that spoke at the church right up the road. It was later sold to the prior buyers, then foreclosed, and that's when we got it. Nothing more was said of what happened to the preacher. Now, pretty much immediately after we moved in, we started to update the house. We did flooring, painting, and all things that come with buying an older house. We didn't experience anything unusual during that time. After we'd gotten settled in and all renovations ceased, I invited my friend over to show her the new house. This is when my first experience happened. I started showing her around the kitchen, living room, bathrooms, etc. first, because I was saving my bedroom for last. As soon as I started to push my bedroom door open, we heard an object scrape across the tile of my bedroom directly towards us. I looked all around, and that's when I saw a little LED booklight by my feet. It's important to note that I strictly remember wedging that booklight between two heavy books on my bookshelf the night before, and that bookshelf was at least 12 feet from my bedroom door. I remember my friend's face looking tense and uneasy as I tried to explain. I even marched over to my bookshelf and tried to understand the logistics of how it happened, or how it could have happened. Truthfully, there was no way I could explain it. And frankly, the fact that it was thrown in my direction specifically made me feel anxious. That event seemed to be the catalyst. Strange things started happening to not only me, but my family as well. When we started opening up about the whole ordeal as a family, all three of us started to realize we had all shared the same experiences. One we all heard when walking down the same hallway was a man's deep voice saying "hey" in a rushed, loud tone. Anyone who has heard any kind of voice phenomena knows that it's so strange because it sounds as though it's directly in your ear canal. It's unlike anything else. Another common occurrence we shared was in the bathroom at night. When we had to wake up and pee, we all recounted hearing heavy footsteps, almost like a man in boots approaching the closed bathroom door. The steps would stop right outside the bathroom door, and you could bend down and see the shadow of feet underneath the door. Then they would walk away. We also frequently heard the front door opening, only to find it was fully closed. At one point, my mom, being sensitive as I mentioned earlier, was lying in her bed at night, just about to drift off, when she had a strange feeling come over her. She got the image in her head of an older male. She mentioned he had an angry face, and you could just feel his feeling of anger and hostility. I think she came to the assumption it could have possibly been the preacher, though we have no proof of this. If it was him, I can certainly tell you he did not like me one bit. This is where my story and experiences turn a little darker. We had lived in the house for about a year or so now, and summer started to come around. I decided I wanted my own space and moved out to the separated garage space. It was a huge space that we never kept the cars in anyways. I remember completely making the space my own. I bought huge curtains, painted the cement walls, got a mini fridge, brought in a TV, a PS2, and, most importantly, all my music equipment. I have always been a music lover and devoted a lot of my time to playing electric guitar in my early teens. This is something that's always followed me. Right about this time is when I found my love for classic rock. But what really intrigued me was its dark history. It had gotten to a point where my mom and sister barely saw me in the house anymore. I had become a hermit in the garage, playing music and delving deep into research on my laptop. One figure in classic rock I was particularly engaged in was Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. According to a lot of books and articles, he was into the occult and followed English occultist Aleister Crowley. I often found myself falling down a rabbit hole, and I started to feel so disconnected from reality. It was then when I became obsessed with that old idea, the whole sell your soul to the devil and shred like a madman on guitar. And one time while practicing, I believe someone or something gave me a taste of what it would feel like. There was one solo in particular I had tried to play a few times, but could never quite hammer down. I had started to practice it again one day, and started playing most of all the fast-paced solo perfectly. I all but ripped my guitar strap trying to get my guitar off. It terrified me. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for me to stop my isolation and research, though I didn't touch my guitar for a while. My friends that I had back then were very like-minded, all very interested in the paranormal, occult, and otherworldly things. My garage started to be a safe place for all the friends I had, and there were plenty of long nights partying and partaking in things no mom would be proud of. But we were rebellious, defiant teenagers. None of us cared at the time. It was around this point I remember almost dreading going into the house when I had to inevitably take a shower or use the bathroom. In a sense, I didn't feel particularly welcome there either. I remember taking a shower one day, listening to Black Sabbath on a nearby iPad. The music kept pausing, so I would reach out and press play again. This happened about 3 or more times when I finally yelled, "I know it's you, stop doing that!" And it didn't happen again for the remainder of my shower. It could have been a coincidence or a technical fault for sure, but I remember being so bold towards what I thought was that old preacher man, almost feeling a hatred towards him. One morning, when I was still sleeping in the garage, my mom busted through the door and started to throw all my things around. She was screaming, "I don't know what the F is going on in here, but something's got to change. Something's not right." Her voice sounded angry, but I could hear the undertones of fear. Keep in mind, it's not like I had a huge pentagram spray painted on the exterior of the garage. As far as I knew, she had no clue of what I was looking into, and what I had been experiencing. It was the intuition of a loving and concerned mother, I guess. She proceeded to rip down my posters and grabbed random items of mine and threw them outside the garage door onto the lawn. I remember this like it was yesterday because I think it finally hit me how far things had gone. And seeing my mom so upset and ultimately scared, I think knocked some sense into me. It was then that I also moved back into the house, as it was turning to fall and started to become too cold to stay in the garage overnight anyways. Ultimately, I purged anything I had that truly had any dark personal significance to me during my move back into the house. The last thing that happened, and probably the worst of all, happened to my sister. The only way I heard her story was by listening to her explaining it to my mom. Even though I was completely moved into the house now, my family still kept their distance. I knew they felt something too. I felt as if I really divided my family. My sister had a job that required her to get up early in the morning when it was still dark outside. She was smoking a cigarette on the back porch, which has a direct view of the garage, and the steep hill that runs alongside it. She said she saw a dark mass, low to the ground. She first spotted it come from behind the back of the garage. It then started to charge down the steep hill towards the back porch where she was standing. She expressed to my mom she had never felt so much fear in her life, and she quickly shut the back door. She also said she didn't believe it was an animal because as it was charging towards her, there was absolutely no sound. No paws, hooves, or sound of feet on the soft ground. The house seemed to go quiet after that, no voices or footsteps. Unfortunately, a few years later, my mom could no longer keep up during a harsh winter. Everything started to break, and we didn't have the money to repair things. We couldn't even keep the house warm. We decided to up and leave. Most of our belongings were still in the house when we did leave. We came back a few times on warmer days to grab some more of our things, and I started to see our old home become a complete state of disrepair, mold growing absolutely everywhere, paint starting to peel, and all the hard work we had put into it gone. It was harder for my mom to see it. It was the first house she had bought, and it killed her to just abandon it. It eventually went back into foreclosure. When I turned 20, I got my first apartment that had to be blessed twice. I thought everything had gone back to normal at that point. I then met my now husband when I was still in my first apartment. He had no idea of my dark past, and admitted to me that he felt something dark in my apartment. One night, it got so bad, he said he had to pray over me. I've had 2 apartments since then, and we both don't sense anything inherently dark. Sometimes I still wonder if it's truly left. I got in contact with a good friend who distanced herself from me during that dark time. I would actually consider her my closest friend. She recounts things very differently and said that I had definitely changed. She has a few stories of her own and things that I had said to her that were very unlike my true character. The crazy thing is, I don't remember saying some of those things. I truly don't think I knew how bad it had gotten. When I was in 6th grade, I almost never did my homework. So this one evening, I was particularly proud of myself for completing all my assignments. I put them away and into my backpack, actually looking forward to school the next day because I wouldn't have to come up with yet another excuse for not having done what I was supposed to do. The next day in my first class, I went to pull out my assignment, but it wasn't there. I panicked and looked through the rest of my backpack. Not one assignment from any class was in there. I couldn't understand what had happened to them. Maybe my brothers played a prank and took them? But that wasn't the case. What really drove the oddity of this day was everyone talking about the fight that had happened the day before. I remember asking my friend what had happened, and she gave me this weird look like I was crazy. She said, "What do you mean? You were standing right here when it happened. We watched the whole thing." I had no memory of this whatsoever. Turns out, I had no memory of anything that had happened the day before. Not at school, not at home. I had lost an entire day. I did turn in all my assignments the day after I'd completed them. It had just been the day before, and I apparently hadn't done any of the new homework. It's a fairly benign story, but that was 31 years ago. And to this day, I still have no idea what had happened the day before, and no clue why I lost the whole day. It still bothers me. Hey guys, first post here, but I just want to start out saying I have stumbled upon this subreddit before, and found some very intriguing stuff before I owned a Reddit account, and only after hearing a friend recount a very strange unexplainable incident last night. It came to make me remember my own experience, and I wanted to share it here to see if anyone else had any idea what it could be, because it's a little too weird for my liking. I never believed in ghosts or the paranormal at all before, and I want to make that clear because I always made fun of people who did. Not being mean, but more or less telling them, hey, this doesn't exist, that's not possible, yada yada. And 2 years ago, while I'm out for a night with my cousin catching up when I moved to her town, we go out for a drive and end up by the old soccer pitch, which is pretty out of the way from the rest of the town, and is up on a secluded hill close to the edge of town that is the beginning of a dense forest. We are shooting the shit and chatting, and I get out to smoke a joint, and she lowers the window about halfway while I stand about 2 feet away to chat. Now here's where shit gets weird. I'm standing a bit away from the car, back facing the trees, and I hear what is a very subtle yet strange noise I wouldn't be able to recreate, but immediately put it out of my mind, thinking it's probably the car idling making a weird noise or I'm just getting baked. But lo and behold, not 2 seconds after I hear it and I turn halfway around to look behind me, my cousin, who is talking, stops, is quiet for a moment, then says, "Did you hear that?" And at this point, I'm not weirded out, because I do a quick check behind me, scan the trees, and all is good. And I was like, "No, I didn't hear anything." So she keeps talking, and I start to get this terrible sense of dread. I learned to start listening to my gut when I feel something is off, because not often it happens, but when it does, I've learned in the past I should have listened. Maybe it was someone around me who had ill intentions or whatever. I get this bad feeling like something's not right, and that was the case here as well. Almost like I really should leave, and was not the only one up there with my cousin. A minute goes by, joint is almost out, and this feeling intensifies to a point I felt I had to turn around, like something was coming. And that's when I saw clearly, not like it was hard to pick out, a white head resembling a face, no facial features. Just a lump where a nose should have been, and holes where eyes should have been. It was very fucking white, and chills me when I try to remember the look of it. I remember doing a double take, like, no way that's not what I'm seeing, and it was still there, but just slightly closer. In the few seconds between me jumping in the car and seeing it, I glanced down, then back up and around, to notice that there was no possible way it was a bag hanging on a tree. It was suspended in the air away from anything else and was too clear to see. Also, it had no legs or nothing holding it up, and that's when my mind went from kinda chill to fuck this. And when I so hastily got in the car, my cousin was like, What? And I told her quickly what I saw and pointed at it, which was now slowly moving forward, which I remember making my blood run cold. I didn't know what the fuck it was at all. It wasn't anything I could logic out, and I had many times before with other stories people told me, or occurrences that happened to me myself, but I came up with an explanation and just told myself that was the case. At first, for a second, my cousin didn't see what I was pointing out, but when I pointed again and it kind of emerged from the trees and got somewhat closer to the car, my cousin freaked out and both of us screamed as she threw the car in drive, and we took off down the dirt trail and got back on the road. We both talked way too much about it that night and scared ourselves silly. I wouldn't have slept for days if I never smoked myself stupid to get to sleep. She definitely saw a white face, same as me, and is chilled. She won't go up there anymore, even in the daytime, as I wanted to go back the next day to see if I could check in the trees and logic out what might have happened. I did go back in my own car the next day, a very sunny day, and nothing could have held up what I had seen, nor could it have been a mistake of my eyes. My brain was scattered because for once in my life I was shit-baked. I could not explain what we both saw, and now we don't speak of it. I brought it up once this year, and she got anxious and really wanted me to drop it fast, and wouldn't tell me why, which bothers me because I'm a logical person and I like to get to the bottom of things, so I wanted to know if anyone here has any similar experiences. If anyone has any idea what could have happened that might be a logical explanation I can tell myself, so I don't harp on it any longer, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. This happened several years ago. I was 9 at the time, and I don't remember all the tiny little details, but I remember what happened. A quick thing to note is that I do not and have not ever been easily scared. I love creepy stories and have for a long time. My dad is from Kentucky, and sometimes we go up and visit his family and friends for a week or two over the summer. On this particular trip, we spent several days with a close friend of his. Previously to this trip, the friend's wife had an uncle pass away. He had fought in the Vietnam War, and after coming home had been a recluse. He lived in a house on the property that wasn't too far from the house, but was far enough that you couldn't see it. Well, since the uncle had passed away, they had to clean this house out. While talking about cleaning the house out, the boys and the wife all said that the house was super creepy. My dad's friend denied it and said they were being silly. It was too late because someone had mentioned a creepy thing, and I was absolutely going to see it. So on the second night of staying with them, my dad, my brother, dad's friend, the friend's son, and I all went to the house. It was probably around 9 or 10 at the time and was very dark. We got up to the house and I was super excited. As I said, I love creepy stuff. Anyways, we go inside and immediately I know something is wrong. I get this awful feeling. I want to run and get as far away from that place as possible. I told my dad, but the house was old and fascinating and he didn't want to leave. I started to cry, saying we needed to get out of that house. No one listened to me. My dad convinced me to walk through the rest of the house. All the while, I am terribly creeped out. Anyways, I start to calm down, and then we decide it's time to go upstairs. We get upstairs, and I'm making jokes, trying to calm my nerves. We walked into a room, and there are all these Native American artifacts, arrowheads and stuff like that. Anyways, we're looking around the room, and the friend shows us a plastic Dollar General bag, and inside of the bag is a human skull. Immediately, my dad decides it's time to get out of there. We leave the house, and we don't really talk about it again. Years later, my dad and I did talk about it again. He said that as soon as he'd seen that skull, he knew we needed to leave. Both my dad and I strongly believe in not messing with Native American burial ground stuff. However, while this all creeps me out, the thing that scares me the most is something my dad brought up. He and his friend's wife had discussed the Native American artifacts and the skull. The wife said she was creeped out by it, and my dad advised her to do something about the stuff. They didn't really do anything. A year later, the wife passed away. She started getting sick right around when they had looked through the house. It could be a coincidence, but I'm not sure. All I know is that there was something seriously wrong with that house. Every time I've been near that house since I first went in, I've felt like I'm being watched. I lived at my old house for approximately 8 years from when my daughter was 10 months old. At the beginning, the house seemed empty except for the living folk who resided there. Overall, there were small oddities. Doors closing, a flashlight turning on, my daughter talking with people who weren't there, talking about the witch or the fairies in the cupboard, things being misplaced, and my daughter denying any involvement and instead blaming the witch, that kind of thing. Then things started to progress pretty severely. Enter Fred, my daughter's imaginary friend. Everything changed with Fred. She no longer liked her favorite meals because Fred didn't like them. She hated the water. Previously, she was like a fish. It would only take a bath without screaming if Mommy bathed Fred too, and corrected me if I was not actually touching him. She would hold his hand while walking around and refuse to answer questions, even about what he looked like, because Fred doesn't like Mommy asking questions. We did a cleansing over 3 days, and Fred was history. She cried and asked about him for a few days, but he never came back. After Fred left, she returned to normal. To this day, she loves the water and baths, and spaghetti is once again her favorite meal. Fast forward a few years, and I bought the house. My parents moved out, and it was just me and my kiddo. There was still activity. Letters in the mirror she was too small to reach, names in crayon too neat to be her handwriting. Vivid nightmares, voices, footsteps, finger-sized hole in the newly placed mudding in the living room, guests seeing things and hearing voices, my daughter's toys playing themselves. But nothing as scary as Fred, so we learned to live with it. At the 8-year mark, I was married, had another kiddo, and we all moved into our new home. It was empty, for lack of a better word. No footsteps, no presents, just a house which took a little adjusting but was nice. Over the course of the last few months, my youngest's toys started playing themselves occasionally, even responding to me. We hear footsteps upstairs and thuds as if someone is jumping or falling when no one is there, or a door slamming when we know we are home alone. My husband has also experienced this. And then today, I was downstairs in the basement doing laundry when I heard the dog get really excited and footsteps above me. so I assumed my husband had come home early. When I walked upstairs, the closet door was open, 100% closed when I went downstairs, and no one was home, and the dog was asleep on the second floor, not the ground floor. I've tried EVP, nothing. White noise, nothing. Word bank generators, at first nothing, and then responded when I mentioned my daughters, but now every time I try to turn it on, it only screams random words at me. I've tried to talk with whatever is here before things get out of hand. I'm just at a loss. In March of this year, my husband and I made the very difficult decision to temporarily move in with his parents. I was 7 months pregnant at the time, and we were struggling financially, so we decided to give ourselves 6 months with them to try to get back on our feet. Having built-in help with a newborn was also pretty appealing to us. The 4 of us and our new daughter lived together in a nice, boring suburban home that's far from the cliched haunted house. This house was bought brand new by my husband's grandparents in the early 90s, and when they died, his parents bought it. For some background, I'm someone who has had 2 notable paranormal experiences in my life. My mom passed away when I was 20, and there have been 2 times that she visited me. I won't go into the details of these, but I am absolutely certain of them and that it was my mom. Despite these 2 experiences, I would consider myself pretty skeptical about most paranormal experiences. Anyways, last Wednesday around 2 a.m., my daughter woke up crying and I took her into the nursery to feed and change her. Her nursery is at the front of the house on the front floor with 2 big windows. We tend to keep the curtains on these windows open to let in light and frequently forget to close them at night. I was sitting with my daughter in a rocking chair by the window, rocking her and singing, when someone whispered, "Hey," and knocked on the window sharply 3 times. I ran out of the nursery and woke up my husband. He went outside to investigate with his gun, didn't see anything, and convinced me that I imagined it. I was anxious to believe him and eventually fell back asleep. 2 days later, my husband woke up to our daughter crying around 3 a.m. Her crying didn't wake me up, so he decided to let me sleep while he took her to the nursery to feed and change her. The next morning, he told me, "I didn't want to wake you up last night and scare you, but someone knocked on the nursery window again last night." He had been changing our daughter when, bang, 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 there were 3 loud sharp taps on the window. He calmly set her down and closed the curtains. As soon as he did, bang, 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 there were 3 more knocks. It unnerved him so much that he didn't even look outside. He just sat up all night with our daughter. After he told me, I was convinced that someone was creeping around our house at night. I insisted on telling my father-in-law and having him check the security footage from the cameras on the front of the house. These cameras have really sensitive motion detectors that notify him when there's any motion within their range. He never received any notification the nights we heard the knocking, and went back and watched the footage from both nights in their entirety. There was nobody there. My in-laws told us that it was probably a squirrel or a bird. Although that explanation didn't make any sense, I accepted it and didn't bring it up again. I did, however, move diapers and wipes into our bedroom so that we wouldn't have to go into the nursery at night anymore. A night went by with no activity, but last night I woke up in a panic around 2 a.m. When I opened my eyes, at the foot of our bed was the dark outline of someone who appeared to be 8 to 9 feet tall, just standing there, watching us. I screamed, and just like that, it was gone. My husband woke up in a panic, but again, we convinced ourselves that it was nothing, that I had been half asleep, and that my eyes had been playing tricks on me. We were freaked out, but eventually fell back asleep. This morning, my mother-in-law knocked on our door early, around 7 a.m., which is very unusual. She seemed kind of excited and said, "You guys won't believe this, but last night at 2 a.m., something knocked on our bedroom window too, 3 times, just like you said." My scream around the exact same time hadn't woken them up, but the knocking had. I immediately texted my sister about it, who tried to comfort me by saying, "Maybe it was Mom. Maybe she likes to visit you occasionally to check on the baby." But I know it wasn't her. I've had many encounters with the paranormal over my lifetime, and this is one that stands out. Over a year ago, me and a friend had decided that we were going to do some urban exploring. Before we set out to find places to explore, we stopped and got some disposable vapes. Now that we had full stomachs and fresh nicotine, we were ready to explore. We had gone to 2 places. The first place was just some old abandoned school in a really small town. We found some cool stuff, but nothing too exciting. The second place we had gone to used to be where they printed newspapers. It wasn't a huge building, fairly small. Again, this was another small old town. We had entered through the front door with ease. We began exploring the building, hoping to find us some old newspapers to keep as souvenirs. My friend was looking at a book he had found and began to hit his nightstick. He was showing me a page that had a phone number written in it. We talked about calling the number to see if anyone would answer. While we were talking, my friend's nightstick looked like it was ripped from his hands, and from the look of his face, it was. He said, "What the hell?" After which, a large blind on the window closed. It was a large piece of metal and swung shut like the windows of a fireworks stand, and the sound scared the hell out of us. We began running, and when we left the room we were in, the door shut behind us, forcefully. We ran out through the front door like we had entered, and I swear to this day that this happened. Both of our bikes were slowly riding away from us, then stopped and fell over. I couldn't even catch my breath. I was maybe 15 years old. I'm 28 now. My grandpa had passed away a few weeks before this event. Grandpa was an old Italian fella and had lots of old 1920s style clothing, coats, hats, vests, and was just the toughest old SOB you'd ever meet. Old World War II Navy vet. So my dad brings home a bunch of Grandpa's old clothes, leaves them on his bed and says I can pick out any clothes that I want to keep. Mom and Dad leave to go pick up more stuff. Felt kinda weird, but I thought I'd try. So I'm in my parents' bedroom trying on some coats and stuff. Grandpa was a small guy and I was pretty tall, so most things were almost close to fitting me. At the time, they all just seemed kinda goofy, but in reality, looking back on it, they were very nice clothes. Grandpa liked to dress well. I go to the bed and grab another item to try on, a tan overcoat, real 1920s gangster style. I put this jacket on and it instantly just feels right. You know that feeling you get when you put on an item of clothing that you feel really confident in? That's what this jacket felt like, and I hadn't even seen it on my body yet. So I grab some old hat to go with it and walk into the bathroom to see it in the mirror. So I'm standing in the mirror looking at my reflection. Coat actually fit really nicely. I look down at the hat in my hand to dust it off a bit, look up at my reflection and freeze. It's not my reflection. I mean, I know it's my reflection. I know I'm in front of a mirror, and I know my surroundings are in my parents' room. But the face that's looking back at me is not mine. It was a very odd but reassuring feeling, because I just felt like I knew it was my grandpa looking back at me. So I'm just frozen, standing there staring back at this face that I know without a doubt belonged to my grandfather. I was there for what felt like a couple of seconds, then suddenly the face becomes mine again, and I feel sad. I had felt odd, kinda eerie looking back at a different face, but as soon as it was over, those feelings were replaced by sadness. I was just feeling a lot of emotions at that point. I was not super close with my grandpa, but seeing my dad go through the loss was really hard. My eyes well up and a tear falls from my cheek onto the lapel of the coat. I felt a slight pressure onto the front of the jacket, almost like someone was gently smoothing it out across the lapels. Again, I have no idea how to really explain it. I just felt so sure that it was him there getting me straightened up, and it made me feel better. I kept the coat, still have it to this day. Every once in a great while, especially on an emotional day like my wedding, I feel like he is there again. Never feels malicious, just feels like he's making sure my tie is on straight and I'm doing all right. I'm from the northeast of England, in the UK, Tyne and Wear. I moved into my home the first week of September this year, 2020. It's an amazing home with a very small passageway when you walk through the front door. Only one person can fit at a time. Straight ahead is a set of stairs leading to 2 big bedrooms and also a very large bathroom. However, right at the bottom of the stairs is a little space, and on the left is a space leading to a living room and kitchen. Anyways, we got settled in, me and my fiancé and my 2 young boys of 3 and 6. Due to needing to redecorate and get something on the floors other than old creaky floorboards, my fiancé has been working all hours, 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. at times. Because he's been out, I spend a lot of time with the boys. The second week of living there, we had been with minor incidences, such as hearing the front door being tried during the night. The dog would bark as if spooked. We have a large muscly staffy who doesn't often bark. He's normally big of heart. One time, the workman accidentally knocked a wall down. Rather than attacking them, he rolled on his back for a tummy rub. To see him bark and snarl and headbutt the door downstairs was odd. However, after an hour or so, he got settled in and got back into bed. So, as I was saying, 2 weeks in and it's Saturday morning. The boys are watching TV in the bedroom. I'm sitting listening to scary stories on YouTube. When my eldest boy Luke comes in, "Mammy, when did Daddy come home and how did he teleport so fast?" I was taken aback. "Daddy's at work," I explained. I then asked, "Did you see Daddy?" He said he hadn't seen Daddy, but that Daddy had asked in his ear, "What are you doing? You know this isn't your bedroom." He said he then heard a woman he didn't recognize saying, "Leave the boys alone." He said he only saw a shadow. Freaked out, I immediately let the dog upstairs, telling them not to worry if anyone was in the house. The dog would let us know. I didn't at all expect my dog to sit on my bed, all his hair standing up and growling. After around 5 minutes, he plodded off back downstairs to lie on the sofa. The boys were so freaked out, I let them continue their movie in my room with me. I messaged my partner and he came back home and searched the full house. There was not a soul in sight. So another week passes and nothing. Then the boys were playing hide and seek on a Sunday afternoon. It's not unusual for them to play while we have a film afternoon, as we don't have much time to ourselves. We were sitting in the room and our youngest son Jay runs in. He goes and hides in the cupboard in our room, when suddenly Luke starts to chase something into the bathroom and back into his room. Then he comes in and says, "Mammy, Daddy, how did Jay get past me?" We look at each other and say, "He's been hiding in here the whole time." And then Jay comes out of the closet. Luke says, "I saw him. I know I saw a little boy." We were kind of freaked. We heard nothing else for another 4 weeks. Then, just last weekend, my fiancé was getting the Hoover from upstairs and fell from top to bottom. He put a hole in the living room door when he finally landed at the bottom. He had twisted his ankle but was generally fine. The same day, my uncle comes in to use the toilet, and he also falls down the stairs, swearing he was pushed and he fractured his wrist. After a day or two, my next-door neighbor asks how we've been settling in. I say we're fine, there's just been accidents on the stairs. 2 of them already. She looks me dead in the eyes and says, "It was 3 weeks before you moved in. The woman who lived here was found dead at the bottom of the stairs. She had fallen and was found the next day. Not only that, but our back garden joins into one of the biggest cemeteries around. I'll keep you updated as what goes on. As of now, we've got the boys 2 kittens to keep them company and make them feel safer. We also have a lot of battery-powered lights, as all the other ones in our house flicker and blow, and the landlord hasn't yet been able to find a reason why."